Josh and Frankie.
What a couple of dumb shits.
Hello, primates! You found Primus Tracks. Congratulations. Wow, I haven't gotten to say that in a while. I am Josh, also known as Senior Bald, and that's because of my pal Frankie, who happens to be joining me today. Hi, Frankie.
Hi, Josh. I'm pretty excited to tackle this era of Primus.
We are getting into an interesting era of Primus. I will say interesting because it can go both ways, and it seems like it did. We recently talked to Toby Wright about the recording of Rhinoplasty for 1998. Based on what we read in the Over the Electric Grapevine book, they're dipping the toe in the water to find how would it work for them to work with their producer on their next LP.
And you know, Lefkowitz makes a great point at the beginning of the Antipop chapter. He mentions that it was the first time Les seemed unsure about his moves and about his artistic choices. And it tells. On previous albums, you can tell that he was very committed to his vision and to the songs that they were recording. And I guess that Antipop could be the beginning of the throwing pasta at the wall kind of approach that he has for music ever since.
That's a great point. I also remember him saying about Antipop, we almost shit our pants. So it was that close, I guess, in his estimation. So a lot of interesting things happening. I'm going to use that word a lot, but a lot of things swirling around as the band goes into the studio to record Antipop for a 1999 release. I believe Soya talked about it here and there that these bands that had come up revering Primus or cited them as influences were now selling 2-3 million albums. Your Korns, your Limp Bizkits, your whoever's, your Incubus even, they were out there, and your Rage Against the Machine, and they, man alive. And all of a sudden they're all surpassing Primus in terms of popularity and MTV play and whatnot. Which is
Roach were also huge on Primus.
Oh, absolutely. That's right. That's a big one. That isn't to say that Primus wasn't being successful. It's just that's what was popular at the time. That's what people grabbed onto. Or that's what people were fed, depending on how you look at it. And, Primus was still in that, I guess they were still in the ballpark, because we do see them on the Family Values tour and that sort of thing. This does seem to be like Interscope's Hail Mary or their big shot to get Primus back to the mainstream.
Absolutely. I agree with you completely.
Yeah. So there is some label pressure. They want the band to work with some producers. Let's talk about that. They went with Toby Wright for Rhinoplasty. Things went pretty well. That recording sounds great. And I will jokingly say, especially when you hold it up to the Brown album, sounds really good. Once again, Brown album has that unique sound, and that kind of burned them when they made that decision. As far as critical reaction, however you want to, however much stock you want to put in that. But here we are. They're going into the studio. They're looking for people to work with to produce. I'm sure you have the laundry list over there, Frankie.
Sure. How about going over each one of the collaborators and, just discussing how we feel about their approach to working with Primus and the end result.
That sounds good. And you also have some names of people they reached out to who did not reply.
Oh, yeah. So that is quite a shocking detail.
Yeah.
They were looking for someone to produce the whole album. They reached out to Brian Eno. They got no response. So previously, I had raised this question to Soya, and he didn't have any recollection about it. But it's because it didn't happen around the time of the Brown album. It happened with Antipop. So there was no response for Brian Eno. Then they were shopping around with Peter Gabriel, whom also failed to respond. And they also tried their luck with Roger Waters, whom also declined to respond. So that's when they realized that getting someone to commit to a full album was too much. So it would be a wiser approach to ask people to collaborate on individual tracks. Now, I think this is an interesting point to discuss because by the time they were, about to work on Antipop, they were an established band. They were a household name in several circuits. They were a respected band as well. I think that by this time, perhaps a lot of that novelty of Wynona's Big Brown Beaver had worn off a bit.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I can't imagine how tough it must have been on them to have achieved all those things and yet, be declined by these musicians, which basically tells you that, for those kind of people, who the hell is Primus? That's probably what they were thinking.
I got a lot of that when I was in high school trying to show people that band. Who the hell is Primus? That was a common thread. So it runs through to really famous rock musicians too. That's great. Well, so we do have quite a laundry list, and I'm curious what you think just off the top with a band, and it doesn't matter what the band is, if they are working with multiple producers for multiple tracks, it just seems to me as a non-musician that it would screw with my head a little bit to where I might not know who I am or what I sound like anymore, and I would fear that it would be a mishmash.
Totally.
But we'll I guess we'll reserve judgment on that. So, but Frankie, why don't you take us down the list of collaborators and producers that we have on this record?
All right. So let's begin with Oz Fritz.
Old Oz.
Whom would later get his very own track in the Grand Pecking Order.
That's right, by Oysterhead, yeah.
That's right. So how do you feel about what Oz did for the record?
Well, looking at my little booklet here, there's my sound effect. That was the actual booklet. I will sign it and mail it to you for $400, listeners of Primus Tracks. I'd be happy to do that. My understanding is that Oz really actually was engineering most of these tracks up at Rancho Relaxo. We should note that many of these tracks were recorded at Rancho Relaxo, and many of these tracks were not. It's roughly a half and half split, I believe. Yep. So Oz is engineering this album, and it sounds great. And I think that's a product of the label saying, we need something that's edible. We need something that people can swallow. So, give us some sound. Don't do that Brown Album thing. I don't know if they actually said that, but I would imagine that was some of the subtext of the conversation. So Oz is there engineering, and it's so funny to hear that half of this record is recorded at Rancho, and it sounds so slick, and it sounds so professional and well done, because we know that Rancho Relaxo is just a guest house.
That's right.
So he got a really great sound out of that band in that space. I applaud Oz for that for sure.
A small detour from the guest list to discuss the sound of the album. I guess because of the performances that were recorded, in my mind, I strongly associate the antimatter with Antipop. But as we know, that bass was not actually part of the recording of the album. They were using, Les was using the same bass guitars he had been using on previous albums. But there is something very distinct about the sound of this album. It's unlike any other Primus album, and it comes down to a very specific thing, which I believe you like to refer to as
the dreaded envelope filter. Is that what you're going? You're going to do that this early? Oh my gosh.
I am a supporter of the envelope filter.
Okay.
I really enjoy what it does for the songs, both on the records and live. I don't know, I guess the novelty of its sound has never worn off for me. I mean, Hennepin Crawler is one of my all-time favorite Primus songs, and that's like the envelope filter anthem of all Primus tracks. So I don't mind it. I actually like it. And in your case, Josh, why do you have such a distaste for it?
I just feel like, let me qualify by saying on this record, I don't feel like it's overused. And I feel like he uses it tastefully and he uses it correctly. And I'm using air quotes around correctly because there is no correct way to use it. But it's correct for my ears. It works for my ears. But then when he gets into those Frog Brigade years and he's just weepy-womping all over the place with that thing and doing 10-minute solos, I'm going, man, this is overkill to me. So it just got overused on the live circuit, especially when he went to the Frog Brigade. And I really was trying to follow him on the Frog Brigade because I went, there's no more Primus, but I need my fix, So I just feel like there was too much there. But I will say the introduction of it here, and I think with the really slick recording, it does work, especially on something like Liquid Sky, where it makes sense.
Absolutely.
But you're a lifer, so that's really interesting. I think you should be buried with an envelope filter. We should get you one.
Yeah.
And you can broadcast from beyond the grave.
Think about the break on Greet the Sacred Cow. I mean, can you picture that without the envelope filter? I think it's vital to the song.
I think you're right. I think that's one of the places, like I said, I think it's used pretty well on this record. And that is one of my favorite tracks on the record. So I can't wait till we get to that one when we do our individual episodes. But it does work there because otherwise he's just doing a little thumping and plucking exercise, but the filter makes it sound different and unique.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that track. Let's just talk about that. I don't want to talk about any of this other stuff. Let's fast forward. Oh, yeah. So, among other things, you made that note about the antimatter bass. Actually, I don't think it arrived until right after they finished recording or he was getting ready for the tour, and he played that antimatter bass quite a bit on the subsequent tours.
And it's a really cool instrument.
It looks great, and it has a really aggressive tone. And he actually played it for that initial Oysterhead show in May of 2000.
Right on.
And if you listen to that live recording, you can just hear antimatter bass. It just has that tone to it. And that's funny to me because I don't think I ever made that connection before. So they're, I think, almost using all their standard gear at that point. The ADA preamp that Les used, that CG had made for him many years ago, actually resurfaces on this album. I'm not going to tell anybody yet where and when that happens on the record. So you have to listen to all the episodes of Antipop to find out. But there's a lot of cool stuff happening. Lur's playing his PRS. Brain's kit, I actually wish I knew, and maybe we can get Soya to ask Brain if he had changed his kit up at all for the creation of Antipop, but I think I heard a North drum or two in there somewhere on this record. Could be wrong. I don't want to be, though. So, yeah, really great tones all the way around, too, and I think that's in part because of our friend Oz Fritz and maybe some of these producers that slid into the chair as well.
And I recall reading in some interview that, I mean, even though he was not very fond about the album for a long time, Les still appreciated the tone in the record, right? I mean, he said it sounded great.
Yeah, I think he said that to us. So, not to cite our own podcast, but I think he did. I think he said that more than once.
Yeah. I recall him saying something like that in one article where he was going over each album in the Primus discography. I think he was ranking the albums from worst to best from his own perspective. I believe Antipop was probably the worst, but he praised the tone of the album.
That sounds right. I know the article you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Yes, that sounds right. And we should mention that some of these tracks are resurfacing on the current Rush tour, so that's interesting. Finally. When we get to some of those tracks, you'll actually have some live history to talk about, Frankie. You're going to have to do a little more, as opposed to going, I don't know. So that's great. So it is exciting, actually, to be talking about this record as some of these tracks start to resurface, whether it's in the middle of another song or the entire song itself or teases here and there.
All right. Another collaborator that I think we should talk about is Matt Stone.
This is an interesting one because in the book, the Over the Electric Grapevine book by Greg Prato, which I can't say enough about, go buy it. This is the funniest one to me because they brought in Matt Stone, co-creator of South Park, and now almost a billionaire at this point, I think. They called him and said, "Hey, this is what I think is great." They just went and called a bunch of their own friends after striking out with their moonshots to guys like Roger Waters. And they said to Matt Stone, "Hey, you want to come produce a song?" And he said, "What do I do?" He didn't know. And they said, "We'll noodle around. You pick the stuff that sounds good. We'll make a song." Wow. I couldn't think of a better way to spend an afternoon is to listen to Primus play some music and go, do that. Put that there. Now play this. Their pal Matt Stone got to produce one of what I think is one of the stronger tracks on the album, Natural Joe. I think in the book Les goes on to say it was like having our fan club in the room. So
it's ironic, right? Because I mean, Les worshipped Stuart Copeland, and they had him on the record, and Matt Stone worshipped Les Claypool, and they had him on the record. So somebody was gushing for someone else at the studio.
Yeah, probably in almost all of these situations, there was some gushing happening. Yeah. Well, you mentioned Stu. So how did they get Stuart Copeland? I forget. So Stu says, "Sure, I'll produce this Primus track. I'm not doing anything. I haven't sat behind a kit in 15 years. And I do remember him saying in the book that he watched Brain play and went, "Oh yeah, he's got it." And Brain felt like he was screwing up a bunch in front of Stu, but Stu was like, "Yeah, Brain, you're a great drummer. Keep doing what you're doing." It was really interesting to have Stewart come in and say, "You know what you guys need?" He's saying this to Primus, of course. "You know what you guys need? A female vocalist in the background."
That's right. That's why Les reached out to Martina to be on the track. And I mean, who would have thought of a female backing vocalist in a Primus album, right?
Yeah. I think there's only two people that could get away with saying we should do some female backing vocals on this Primus track, and Les would say okay, and they both just happen to produce tracks on this record, Stuart Copeland and Tom Waits. I think anybody else, Les would say, get the hell out of here. In the sense that Les probably would go, I don't think that's what I want to do, but these guys had that idea and he went with it, and the results speak for themselves. They're pretty effective.
But we must point out that he hadn't heard of Primus at that point yet.
That's right, and that makes it all the more interesting.
Stuart Copeland did know Primus, and there's a specific reason why he agreed to produce the track.
Oh.
His teenage kids were into Primus, and he wanted to impress them.
Oh, that's right. I remember
that's
this
right.
Now. That was the thread.
Yeah.
So
when he got the call and they said, "Do you want to do a song for Primus?" He was on board because he had heard about them.
through his
kids, yeah.
Maybe they'll think I'm cool. Yeah. Isn't that great? Celebrities are just like us.
Yeah.
They're not cool to their kids.
So this is when Martina comes into the equation. Les reached out to her, and she became the first female vocalist on a Primus album.
Yeah. Only one to date, correct?
The only one to date. Well, I mean, we could think about Gabi Lala, but she's not on a Primus album. So
sure. Yeah.
On a Primus album in the strict sense, for sure.
Okay. Wow. Well, she's got a claim to fame that, a handful of people would recognize her for. You're the gal from that Primus record. Would be quite an obscure credit for her to be recognized by, but that'd be great.
What I appreciate about Stuart working on this album is that I recall Stuart Copeland telling Les that he had to be more confident in his singing.
Yeah.
I think until this point, it's amazing. They had toured the world. Les had performed in front of thousands of people, but he was still convinced that his voice wasn't a good instrument.
Right.
And Stuart Copeland told him to actually sing.
Yeah. Yeah. And he does. He does on that track for sure.
And he does. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. He must have talked to a lot of people about that because I remember in an interview, the weirdest shit sticks in my head, Frankie, but I do remember that in some interview that, Les gave in 99 or whatever, he said he was talking to James Hetfield about the same thing. And Hetfield said, you can actually sing, right? You should do it. And so he's like, okay. So I guess when you hear it from heavies like that, you'll be more willing to give it a try and come out of your comfort zone, and he gives it a go, and it sounds good.
Yeah, and look at him now. I mean, he's singing an entire Rush album nowadays.
Yeah, albeit in a lower register, which any sane person would do. So, good for him. So we have all these great people. Stuart Copeland, that was a big get, considering what he would do with Stu in the future. Boy, that really changed the course of, I guess, both their careers because they got to do that Oysterhead thing, and that's huge.
Would you like to dive into the incredible cast they had for Eclectic Electric?
Let me turn to that page because I don't know that I can get them all. But so here's what I have. I'm reading it straight from the book. 7-8 different people on this track.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people for a Primus record. That's Los Bastardos level, Frankie.
Yeah.
So we have...
This is the Los Bastardos of Antipop.
Yes. So we have Les, Larry, and Brain, of course. And then when we get to part 2 with Sanity is Coming to Town, and I had totally forgotten, I'm looking at the liner notes right now, I had totally forgotten that it's officially a 3-part song. So when we get to that Sanity is Coming to Town part, we get guitar parts from Jim Martin and James Hetfield. Jim Martin of Faith No More fame. Les said he wanted 2 of the heaviest guitarists he could think of for that part, and he got them. And Frankie, I don't know if you can tell, but I can definitely tell who's who.
For sure, but I'm not a Metallica expert by
Mm-hmm.
any stretch, so I'm gonna ask you, Josh, in case that you know, didn't Metallica used to have some kind of weird rule that they couldn't or shouldn't play in records by other artists?
That is correct, with very few exceptions that I can think of. They were not allowed to do that, and that was a rule they had made for themselves.
And
And
wasn't James Hetfield reluctant to having his name on the booklet?
my understanding is he said he would do it as long as he was not credited. And I guess some things got lost in the shuffle as management was talking to management and people were talking to people.
Yeah.
And his name ended up in the credits, and I don't think he was too.
He must have been furious.
I'm guessing he wasn't too happy about that. And that's really unfortunate because, we know that Les is a respectful guy and he's not going to do anything people don't want to. Yeah, that's unfortunate, but there's his name right there. Which also begs the question, and I know I'm jumping way ahead, if Kirk Hammett was on that cover of Fame, maybe that thing was dead in the water from the beginning. Or he was going to be uncredited. I don't know.
Sure.
But we'll have our Bowie moment. We'll do our Bowie half hour at the end. So be ready for that, everybody. Also on the track, we have three other people. We have Cage and Lena, who happen to be Les's kids. They're credited as the Twinkle Monster, which I think is great because you get to hear them at the beginning of the track goofing around, and Les decided to use those recordings in the intro there. And then we also have my close personal friend and hero, Turk Black, on the repetition vocal of Pressing Onward Towards the Light. You guys heard him. They didn't have to process his voice too much to get way down there for Pressing Onward Towards the Light. Man, he can bring it. He's got quite a baritone, Frankie.
Absolutely.
What a list.
How do you feel, Josh, about one of your heroes being on this track and that we got to talk to him a while ago?
So once again, this is exactly where I thought Turk Black was a made-up person. But then there he is credited on Antipop, and then they're making these oblique references to him on the Primus website at the time, and I'm going, who the hell is this? But there he was, so it was really great when I realized, oh, Turk Black is a real person. So, and he's on the record. Good for him. Another producer we could talk about because he's on 3 damn tracks, Tom Morello's guest turn on 3 tracks on this album.
They stand out completely. It's like what we were saying about Les's bass playing in another episode that is very idiosyncratic, and it could be completely isolated and you could tell that it's Les Claypool. I think it's the same with Tom Morello. I mean, anything he puts his name on has his sound all over it.
Absolutely, especially these 3 tracks that he's on. It's very easy to know which guitar is his.
Totally.
And you just hear it, and you go, that's Tom Morello playing. And so he brings, and that's what's interesting to me, because as I was saying earlier, I would think, man, it would be kind of hard for me to make sure I still had my voice, because you have Tom Morello not just producing, but co-writing and performing on these tracks. And they are very Tom Morello driven. And I remember, when I wasn't too happy about this album 20 years ago or so, I was like, oh, great, Rage Against the Machine reject riffs. That's what Primus needs. But there's some redeeming qualities to these tracks. But boy, it's very interesting that he got to do 3 of them, whereas everybody else took a single turn.
Yeah, it really speaks to how much they admired him, right?
I think so. And, when you're doing press for a new album, of course, everybody's the greatest in the world and it's your best album ever and blah. But I think Les was sincere in all that press around the album when he was saying working with Tom was quite a unique experience. And he did say at that point, he said he's one of the best guitar players I've ever played with. And now that was in 99 and he's played with a bajillion guitar players since. So that is not to say Tom's not still up there, but it's quite a testament to him. And can you confirm this for me? Because I think I've said this before on the air, perhaps, but I recall somewhere at some time, Oysterhead was supposed to be Stuart Copeland and
That's
Tom
right.
Morello and Les.
That is correct.
Okay. So we can just take a pause and think, what if? And what would
What
that
if,
sound
indeed?
like?
Yes.
What a difference a guitar player makes when you combine them with Les and Stu. So who knows? Who knows what that would have resulted in? So I guess it would not have resulted in tickets being bought up by fish heads in 6 seconds. So,
And Les would never have teased Riva during tracks.
These are but two small things that would have changed, but that we love the minutia. So Tom, we're going to talk about Tom a lot and his contributions as we go. Probably the most controversial person, would you agree, Fred Durst?
Oh my God. Yes, there's so much to discuss here. I love Lacquerhead.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the strongest songs on the album. So whatever Fred Durst contributed to that song, if you tell me that having somebody else on the album would have resulted in Lacquerhead sounding any different, I wouldn't change it. I would ask for Fred Durst to remain in the credits as long as Lacquerhead is intact, because I think it's one of the finest moments of the record. What I do feel, is that in the long term, looking over, the list of collaborators, I mean, having Tom Morello, Stuart Copeland, Tom Waits, all of these people on board, James Hetfield, everyone else that we have gone over. I mean, there's nothing to regret there, right? I mean, these are all amazing musicians, professionals, and regardless of how Les feels about the album, I believe that these people did the best they could for what they were, for the songs that they were working with. But in the case of Fred Durst, I do have a feeling that Les probably regrets deeply his association with Limp Bizkit, which includes his collaboration to one of their albums. And I believe this is because he wanted to distance himself from that scene as much as possible during the Frog Brigade years. And, it's a strange how they're working together in 1999.
Yeah.
And then in 2003, during Tour de Fromage, Les is name-dropping Fred Durst during his rants on stage when somebody throws something at him. Making alluring to the fact that, this is not a Limp Bizkit concert. This is a Primus concert.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a time span of 4 years where his image of Fred Durst completely shattered.
Yeah. At least with that remark, I don't know that that's a dig at Fred so much as a dig at the crowds that they attracted, because Les knows what crowds they attracted because he was on the Family Values tour. And I do remember him saying something about he really didn't like the aggro and machismo and all that crap that was on display because it wasn't him and it wasn't the vibe he wanted. But Primus was starting to get lumped in with those bands and he didn't like it.
Sure, but I mean, the problem is that all of that stuff was pretty evident from the get-go. I guess that Les chose to allow this person to be associated with Primus because maybe he felt it was an opportunity at making the song stand out more, or making Primus, ring more bells with the crowds of the moment or with the record-buying public. But in hindsight, I think it's a complicated topic because Lacquerhead is, as I said, it's one of my favorites. But on paper, having Fred Durst in the credits, it's awful.
Well, I guess at that point, Primus was essentially compromising themselves at the request of their record label. I think that's what was happening. Of course, probably won't get answers to that, and that's okay. You get some of it in the book. But the association with Fred, I would say all of the people that we have talked about up to this point kind of have their own staying power because they established themselves at a time when they could do that and then have staying power. People know who they are. They still buy the records. They still listen to them. But when we're in that late 90s time period, so many bands just came and went, so quickly. I mean, throughout the 90s, but especially in the late 90s where they were just gone. That's what happened to Bizkit. They were, they were a flash in the pan. They had their moment and then they disappeared. I was never really into them, so I couldn't tell you how the music is and what I think of it. But, none of these people turned out to be serial killers. So if the most questionable person you associated with is Fred Durst, you're probably doing okay. especially if you're in the music business. so you're doing okay. But yeah, I remember, I do remember a lot of hate being thrown Fred's way from the hardcore Primus fans when they saw his name on the credits and went,
I will not encourage you to listen to any Limp Bizkit records or look up any of their music. But if there's one thing that I really admire about Limp Bizkit, and maybe it's not even Limp Bizkit itself, it's just the way that Wes Borland appears on stage for their concerts. He has a different outfit for every show, and I mean, he makes an artistic statement with his image. So
nice.
I think that a lot of fans are looking at him instead of looking at Fred Durst during the shows. So that's one cool thing that I do want to recognize about them.
Okay. Well, I will blame Fred for all those backwards red baseball caps that were everywhere my first couple of years of college. And I was going, screw these guys. But at least they put it out there, so I knew I didn't have to interact with them. Because I was like, I can talk to you.
But also, I guess, we have to be fair. So in his even though I don't like their music at all, in Fred's defense, he was not being a phony. He was a real Primus fan. I have no idea if he's still into Primus, but at least at that time, I guess he was, a real fan, having an opportunity to work with musicians he admired.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that you can notice that right away in the Nookie. When that song came out, it was huge. You could hear it everywhere. And then, they dropped out of my radar. And then one day that song came on the TV. And when I heard the bass player playing his line, I thought, oh my God, that sounds completely influenced by Primus.
Oh, sure. Yeah. They wear that stuff on their sleeves. So he definitely probably, I remember him saying it was a thrill of a lifetime for him to produce Primus. So
yeah,
you're absolutely right. He gave it his best effort, and it's a nice tune.
Yeah, it's a great track. So I guess we should go easier on Fred.
Maybe we can do a special episode called Fred Durst, Why Less, Why? And really dissect it. We have one more producer, I think, to talk about, and that's Tom Waits on Coattails of a Dead Man. I had forgotten he produced the track. Now, he brings with him a Mellotron and a Glockenspiel, of all things, which both of those things are very Tom Waits-esque, so I don't know why that would be surprising. But he also has vocals on there, so Tom brings a whole hell of a lot to this track.
And, besides being a career highlight for Les and, a major artistic milestone, it turned out to be his proudest moment on the album. He really loves that song.
I shouldn't say
Exhibit A is the only song from Antipop to feature on They Can't All Be Singers.
That's right. Yeah, that was the only one included. Great point.
And they even performed it live, not only with Primus, but Les also did it, with the Fancy Band. We'll talk about that when we get there. But it's a track that is really dear to him.
Well, I'm going to brag right now, and I will brag again when we get there. I think I got second Primus live performance of this track.
Wow.
Thank you very much. So of course Tom Waits. We know Tom Waits. We talked about Tom Waits. Of course, it's just a no-brainer to get him in if you want your friends to come produce you and your heroes to come produce you. Tom will come down the road and do it. And I believe that one was recorded at Rancho, so it wasn't far for him because he and Les are essentially neighbors.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's curious. Even though the album sounds so different to Brown Album and to everything else before it, in part due to the effects that we were discussing, and the outside influence from all of these collaborators, at the same time, it's curious how, in essence, it maintains a lot of the in-house quality of Primus music. Case in point, we have Cage and Lena on one track. And this was the beginning of their collaborations with Les, which I think have always been done very tastefully. A lot of artists have a tendency to incorporate their kids into their music, and sometimes, the results can be very obnoxious.
Oh, okay.
I love Tori Amos, but every time a new album is going to come out, I always ask myself, is her daughter going to be singing in this album again? And she's always there singing again. And I don't want to listen to her. I want to listen to Tori. So with Primus, I love the fact that Cage and Lena are there, but what they contribute to the track, is not jarring at all.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. There is a consistency of sound throughout this in that regard, despite the recordings taking place around, like we said, a little more than half of the album is recorded at Rancho Relaxo, home of the Brown album. So wrap your head around that. I don't know how much change there was in the recording gear at that point. Somebody knowledgeable can help us. Unfortunately, Soya wasn't there, so we can't.
No, but when he listens to this episode, he's gonna want to be here to tell us all the stuff that we were wrong on.
Oh yes, we'll do an addendum. We're gonna have miscellaneous debris coming out of our ears next time. That's right. But a lot of them then were recorded in L.A. at the Village Recorders. So these guys were going out to Rancho Relaxo in the middle of nowhere, north of the Bay Area, and then going all the way down to L.A. to record with guys like Tom Morello and Matt Stone and Fred and you name it. So that, to me, just seems like it would have been somewhat stressful in and of itself, because when you think of creating a record, you think, okay, we're going to go to this one place, and we're going to dial in the sound, and we're going to knock out all these songs. And that's what Primus did for all the years that they were recording.
Oddly enough, is the album that Brain enjoyed the most.
Right, that's what he says in the book.
He had
a
blast recording this record.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about that as we go track by track, but I really think it's because he really got to dig into these tunes before they recorded, in contrast to the Brown album. But also, man, he really gets to let it rip, and he sounds great. Not to get too far ahead.
I was just about, when you were discussing the different studios, I was just about to mention how, even though so many things changed for this album, there are these hints where you can see that Primus were still being Primus.
Yes.
Which brings me to this quote that wraps up everything that we have been discussing. It says, I listened to the record for the first time, and there's some cornball lyrics on it, but it's actually a very good sounding record. I was really surprised. It's taken me a long time to come back to the record. There's so many things about it. You look at it, and it's such a mess. Besides all the different producers and even the songwriting, it's really cool, but it's not necessarily Primus. So that's weird, right?
I think that speaks to a lot of what we've been saying. That
of course,
it could be a disjointed mess.
Although it's strange how Les would say that, but from our perspective as fans, there are plenty of things on the record that shout Primus to us.
And that's the division between artist and consumer. What sounds like Primus to me doesn't sound like Primus to Primus, because they're the ones in the room. There's that division. I'm not the creator, and so it's going through that filter right here. I'm pointing at my ears. For those, by the way, this is an audio podcast. So it goes through this filter here, and then up through my brain, which is another big filter. Not a very smart filter, but a filter nonetheless. So those, perception really alters that sort of thing. That record came out. Everything around this record, by the way, Les said it before, everything around this record was fucked up. I think they were recording in different places. They were working with all these different producers. They're under this pressure. Les is doubting himself, and they got to get this record out. And they have to get it out so that they can go on Ozfest, and they can go on these tours and support it. But then the record gets delayed, and they're playing Ozfest without a record to support and sell. And I remember that being a major sticking point for Les too, because they're supposed to be touring this record that isn't out. It got delayed by a few months, I think, if I recall correctly. And then the record comes out, and they're already touring. I don't remember if they were doing a headliner tour at that point, but the record still hadn't come out. So the timing was all messed up, and the video for Lacquerhead is then banned by MTV, which we'll talk about later. I can see why he did not have fond memories of this record, and Primus chose to disband. They all, decided to go their separate ways for a while, because it just, for a band as established as them, for all these things to go wrong, I guess it's time to give it a rest.
Sure. Les says that the album is a mess. He also elaborates that it's a reflection of that period in his life. So I guess that is what kept him away from the album for so long, and why he didn't want to listen to it and he didn't want to play any songs from it, because it probably brought some bad memories for him.
20 years on now, to bring it back to the present day, he, starting with that Pachyderm Station show in December 2020.
They're definitely repurposing some of those tracks, because it's interesting how back in the Ozfest tour, and back when they were promoting the album, it's like they had to play those songs to fit with the crowd and, to survive those concerts with the mosh hits.
Yeah.
But now they don't have to play them. They want to play them, which is very different.
That's a great point, because overall, the tone, and I don't mean the sound of the record, but the tone of the record with the music that they're playing and the lyrics is pretty darn aggressive. Which is funny, because almost every Primus release since 1995 has been compared to Frizzle Fry, probably their most aggressive album, except this one. And it's probably the one that's closest in terms of aggression as far as musical aggression and lyrical aggression. So I don't know why it's not compared that way, because it is, although musically it's very different. And of course, when you have all these hands in the cookie jar or cooks in the kitchen, whatever stupid analogy you want to use, things are going to get messed up. Maybe they won't sound like themselves, but I would say overall, this really does conjure memories of Frizzle Fry for me, and the production too. So there's a lot going on there.
They've teased Lacquerhead, they've done Antipop, and they've done Eclectic Electric. Okay,
so 2 of the 3 that they've pulled out were ones
and didn't they tease Liquid Sky as well?
That's what we heard, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so with those 4 tracks that have either been teased or played in full, 3 of them were self-produced and recorded.
Right on.
So what does that tell you? Those are the ones that probably sound like Primus to them. Let's get into those samples, because we were talking about Les's kids are on one part, but then there are all these strange samples, and I had to go back to the last page of the CD booklet, because a lot of these recordings...
I'm very interested, Josh, to know if you've ever been able to track down the original source for the conversation taking place at the beginning of Sacred Cow. As far as I'm concerned, it's artificial, but are you aware of something different?
Our credits say that the ambient recordings on Antipop, which I bird squawking in the rain and that sort of thing, and the wind chime, and Greet the Sacred Cow by Oz Fritz. So Oz must have recorded those voices, that conversation at the start of Sacred Cow. He must have recorded that at some point in his life. And just had that
he created that, right? It doesn't come from anywhere. It's not from a movie. It's not from anything in particular.
Right. It's not a movie sample. It's something that Oz either created or recorded when he was out and about in the world. And I don't know.
Okay, and there's a little controversy with the Sacred Cow recording, because to my ears, the tour guide is saying he's a real religious little shit, right?
For many years, I thought he said righteous, but it is religious. I thought he just said real religious little kid.
That's the controversy. So you hear kid, I hear shit.
I need to pull that. I need to clip that little one right there. I hear shit. The other one, the house panties on Power Mad, I guess Tom Morello provided that.
Sure.
All it says is Tom Morello, house panties, in your CD booklet. Is that something that he pulled from some archival tape? Couldn't tell you.
So this is another case, Josh, where we have to wonder, were these artistic choices the result of, the outsiders pushing the idea to Les, or was it Les who said, you know what, I think this song could benefit from a 1-minute intro?
Yeah, good question. Great question, because
in another context, I wouldn't wonder about it, but we're talking about 1999, the year when a lot of artists were putting out albums that had, like these 30-second tracks between songs.
Right.
That just bloated the track list. And, Primus also made a hidden track for this album, which they had never done since or after, which is also a very 90s thing to do.
Yeah. So maybe they were really feeding into the 90s trends in those regards.
That's the thing with Antipop. For every cool thing and every bad thing about the album, you have to wonder how much of it was, the pressure of the times.
Yeah. I'm reconsidering this record now. But you're absolutely, it is, for every step forward, it seems like there was a step and a half back.
Yeah.
They were doing things that they didn't normally do. And I think that's why the fan reaction was divisive, especially in 99.
I wouldn't call them, I know if we could refer to them as peers, but, at least from other bands at the time, I recall a particular quote that I read online from one of the members of Korn, I believe, who heard, I think they were playing like different tracks for them during an interview and asking them for their opinion about them. And when Lacquerhead came on, one of them said that it sounded like a bad covers band trying to impersonate Primus.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means, So, yeah, there was a bit of a divisive fan reaction. I remember listening to this. I picked it up in 99, and I listened to it a lot. And then I just kind of put it away. Of their 90s output, probably the one I've listened to the least over the years. So it'd be great to dig back into this because it's been a while since I gave it a really close listen.
Another thing about Antipop is that since the get-go, when I discovered Primus, I always admire their album artwork. I thought it was the most original, the most unique. But for many, I've come around a little more to it in recent years, but for a long time, in my iTunes, I didn't use the actual artwork for Antipop in my audio library. I actually used a still frame from the Lacquerhead video, where the guy is sitting on the couch.
Yeah.
Because I thought that looked a lot more like Primus than what they went for with the album cover. I think it's definitely my least favorite Primus album cover, and I think overall it's the least attractive from the entire catalog.
Yeah, so I'm looking at it right now, and in the background we have, I think, what amounts to a still from Videoplasty. There's Les on the right there, and a crowd surfer and all that. And then, yeah, we got the kid there. So this is what I always wondered. So the kid with the machine on his head, and it's all the Primus characters on top. It's hard for me to tell if those Primus characters are being fed into the machine and going into the kid's head, or if they're coming out of the kid's head. But the kid's at the Primus show, right? The kid's at the Primus show. So is this all being forced into his head through the Antipop converter to make the kid a Primus fan, or is this all coming out of his head because he's Antipop and this is how he has to, deal with that? I never really understood that part.
I've never understood the artwork either, to be honest. And then, the back tray of the CD, which has, like the fist with the wings, yeah. I think it's just awful. It doesn't work at all.
It is a bit, I would say let me say that they were really going for something here, and I think they achieved it. I do like the ambience of the pages behind the lyrics.
Yeah, that's cool.
I do like what's going on there. The artwork, yeah, it never really grabbed me because I just thought, well, they're recycling these characters but what are they telling us by doing that?
Maybe it would work for another band, but not for Primus. It's not a Primus album cover.
Yeah. All these characters, to me, are supposed to stand on their own as these unique experiences. Yeah. So,
and even Les dislikes the album cover. He said that they were just presented with it and they were like, okay, cool.
They must have been in a hurry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our credited artist, actually, Zoltron was the art director for this entire album experience, although art and illustration are credited to Craig Howell at Chiba Productions. So I don't know who that is.
So if we ever get Zoltron here, we need to ask him if the characters are being fed into the kid,
yes,
or if he's pushing them out.
Yeah, is he birthing these out of his head, yes, like Zeus to Athena? Is this some kind of weird grinder that's going into his brain? Yeah,
that's something I definitely want Zoltron to address.
You got some splaining to do. Well, we're going to get into a lot with this record, but there's a couple more things. But I want to ask you this before we get into the record proper, Frankie. I want to ask you, does this record hold up for you?
Oh, wow. That's such a difficult question. It's really hard for me to answer because I think about the other Primus albums, and do they sound like a product of their time? absolutely, but in a good way. They represent an era, except Brown Album, which is like completely different story.
1897, yes.
Exactly. But the rest of them, I think, they are not stuck in a particular time frame. They belong to it, but they can still be appreciated in the modern days.
Mm-hmm.
But with Antipop, are there elements of the album which definitely sound dated in 2021? Yes, they do. The hidden tracks, the samples, the artwork, a lot of things about it are really dated, and I think they don't hold very well in the present. Many of the lyrics also don't hold very well.
Good point.
And it's also, the first Primus album where I think there are tracks we definitely skip. We listen to them in the context of the full album if we're doing it back to back, but if I'm enjoying a Primus playlist, Antipop will be there for sure, Lacquerhead will be there, but will I want to sit and listen to Mama Didn't Raise No Fool or Natural Joe? The answer is no.
Okay.
And that is a first for a Primus album.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I just wouldn't skip any track.
Yeah.
So does it hold well? I don't know. It's difficult to answer. I think some things do. Some songs are still amazing, and I'm glad that they are playing them live now. But other things, are pretty disappointing coming from Primus.
I'm going to follow up your nuanced answer to that, which I was not expecting, by the way. Thank you for that. That was great. I don't know yet, because I haven't revisited this album in so long, which is exciting, but I'm also filled with existential dread because I remember it. So I talked about this before. It's perception, right? So my mindset is probably going to dictate how I feel about some of these tracks and the associations that I made with it, because we talked about the associations that even Les Claypool had with it for years, and that's why he didn't want to even touch it, smell it. Last thing, you talked about the hidden track. We are definitely going to cover the Heckler. That was really welcome. And if I am correct, Frankie, the Heckler was the last early Primus song to be brought out of mothballs for a studio recording.
That is correct.
Okay. Those of you that were looking for an old school vibe, go to your dated 90s last track with the 3 minutes of silence after the purported last track, and then find that timeless masterpiece there, which we're going to talk about in about 14 weeks.
That track, being tucked at the end of the record could be seen as a sort of thank you to the long-standing Primus fans, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like, okay, you just heard this record, which is shocking to you as a Primus fan, but here's a little something, to make you remember the good old times.
Yeah. Yeah, here's something you've been waiting for. Yeah. Maybe. That we should ask about that when we get there.
Can I mention something about the collectability factor of the album?
Oh, collectability. Yeah, bring it.
Yes. So, it's kind of ironic. Seas of Cheese is held in much higher regard artistically.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are out in the open and you're searching for an original pressing of Seas of Cheese, it's super easy to find one. And it's not going to set you back a lot.
Oh, wow.
But with Antipop, which is considerably less acclaimed than Seas of Cheese, for instance.
Yeah.
A first pressing, an original pressing of Antipop from 1999 is a true collector's item. It's certainly not in the same league as the Grand Pecking Order or Riddles, for instance, but it's not a cheap album to obtain by any measure.
So you're telling me when I saw that original pressing of Antipop on eBay for $50 and I repeatedly offered 20 and was repeatedly denied, I should have brought up my offer some?
It was a bargain for sure.
Oops.
I think, I put off getting one for a long time because I was interested in other items, but I finally decided to bite the bullet for it back in 2019, and I think I got one for $100.
You guys know Frankie. He researched for days and days and days without sleep. 2018 repress, and I don't remember if it's blue or black vinyl.
Blue.
Because I got it for
because you never played it.
I didn't play it. I bought it and went, sweet, this is part of my collection, and I haven't really looked at it yet. But there's a couple things that don't appear on that album, whether you got it the 2018 reissue or the 1999 original pressing, and those are two covers, one of Wall of Voodoo's Mexican Radio and two of David Bowie's Fame, both of which were hinted at or mentioned in magazine articles and that sort of thing. Or at least Mexican Radio was in Bass Player magazine in 99. Fame, I don't remember when that came to light, if that was not until the Grapevine book.
Yeah, they talked about it in the Grapevine book for the first time, I believe. And both are now legendary songs. And
so we have confirmation thanks to those articles, but recently on a Claypool Sellers Instagram post as they were moving to a new storage unit, we saw cases of master tapes labeled Mexican Radio, and that just got people into a tizzy.
Yeah.
Including myself and Frankie. We know it exists. We don't know how completed it is, but it's there.
Just like the Alice Cooper cover, right? We know it exists.
Oh, Go to Hell. Yes, we know it exists. We don't know its completion. This tells me there are a lot of bits and pieces, but really no completed tunes that are left in the vault, but there are some pieces, and I'm going to guess we'll never hear those.
If they wanted to take the super deluxe edition route, I could perfectly envision CD1, the classic album, CD2, maybe they could throw in the remix that Les did. CD3 could be the rehearsals, the Cheney Unearthed, the real tape that had several rundowns of Jerry and other songs.
Yeah.
CD4, could be unfinished demos and stuff, including Go to Hell. And then, maybe CD5 and 6 could be a couple of live shows. Why not?
You can just
I just pitched a 6-disc super deluxe of Seas of Cheese. I think it's perfectly doable.
Yeah. And do you know how many people are going to pay $89.99 for that? A lot of people are going to.
Yes.
But you just so casually toss that out there. Disc 1, Disc 2, Disc 3. It comes so naturally to you. I don't know why you're not in the record industry. Working for like Rhino Records, going through archives and going, this would be a great box set. Any last thoughts on Antipop before we wrap this one up, Frankie?
Wow. I think Antipop is a very complex record from all angles. The inception of the album, what they were going through with their personal lives, the perspective that they were going through from the record label, from the fan base, the expectations, the fear, as described earlier, is the first time, they were concerned with record sales and all those kind of things. So it's definitely a very, very complicated record, and it shows. But at the same time, it's Primus. So there are also amazing songs in there, which definitely deserved some reevaluation. And I'm glad that Les has come around to it. It's part of Primus history. I think it's worse to pretend that the album never happened like they did for many years and just tuck it under the carpet. I think that's worse. I'm glad that they came around to it. They know it's not a perfect record, but they embrace the songs that really work.
Yeah. That's our making of Antipop. Sorry, couldn't get big names, but nobody wants to talk about this record. So next time, next time we're going to be getting into these track by track.
The first episode is the intro.
Oh, that's right. We're starting with the 3-hour special on intro.
Exactly.
The greatest of all Primus tracks.
Episode 1 intro. That's it.
Later days.
Willie Mays.